Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Imagine a 15-year-old being handed the keys to a kingdom.
A kingdom.
Not just any kingdom.
Right.
One full of legends and rebellions.
Yeah.
That's Edward I.
And that's what we're diving into today. The story of Edward I and his obsession with Wales's past and future.
Our guide for this medieval maze is Edward I and Wales 1254 to 1307 by David Pilling.
It really is a fascinating story.
It really is. The book focuses on the clash between Edward and Llywelyn at Gruffudd.
Each fighting for their own vision of Wales.
Like a Shakespearean drama.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But tell me more about Edward owning land in Wales at only 15.
Well, you see, it's all tied to his marriage to Eleanor of Castile, orchestrated by his father, Henry III.
Smart.
Wasn't just a wedding gift, though.
Yeah.
It was a way for Edward to gain power. See, it placed him in the heart of Welsh politics.
So he was exposed to all the drama.
The alliances and rivalries, exactly.
So he's not just some distant ruler.
No, not at all.
He's got skin in the game.
He was there.
From the beginning.
Yeah, and imagine him being surrounded by all these advisors.
Yeah.
Telling him all these stories about Welsh defiance and rebellion.
Right.
Those years really shaped his views of the Welsh.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
But Wales at this time wasn't a unified nation, right?
Not quite.
It was like a bunch of different principalities, each with their own ruler.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
It seems like it would have been easy for the English to manipulate that kind of fragmentation.
Oh, it absolutely was. And that's where Llywelyn ap Gruffudd comes in.
Okay.
He was the most powerful Welsh prince at the time.
And he wanted to unite Wales.
Yes, free from English interference.
I see where this is going.
It was inevitable.
A clash of ambitions.
Yes, two strong-willed leaders, both with a claim to power and legitimacy.
So was the Treaty of Montgomery in 1267 their attempt at finding peace?
On the surface, yes.
Oh.
It recognized Llywelyn as the Prince of Wales.
Which seems like a win for him.
It does, but the treaty had some major strings attached.
Like what?
Llywelyn had to swear homage to Edward as his overlord.
Oh, I see.
And he had to make big payments to the English crown.
Creating an imbalance of power.
That a lot of the Welsh lords really hated.
Llywelyn included.
Yes.
So even though it's called a peace treaty, it doesn't sound very peaceful.
It wasn't. The tensions were still there, simmering under the surface.
And then Llywelyn married Eleanor de Montfort.
Yeah, a woman with strong English ties.
And whose family was enemies with Edward.
Exactly.
So that was a big mistake.
It was definitely a challenge to Edward's authority.
A challenge he couldn't ignore.
That's right. And he used it as justification to invade Wales in 1277.
The peace is shattered. War has begun.
Full-scale war.
What was Edward's strategy?
He was a very good military strategist.
So what did he do?
Well, he used a combination of force and clever tactics. He took advantage of the existing divisions within Wales.
Turning Llewellyn's own people against him.
Yes. And he also used new siege warfare techniques.
Oh, wow. It allowed him to cut off Llewellyn's supplies and isolate his forces.
But Llywelyn made some mistakes too, right?
He did. He split up his army, which was a big mistake.
Right.
It weakened his forces.
Allowing Edward to defeat them one by one.
Exactly. And he also put too much trust in some allies who ended up switching sides.
Under pressure from Edward.
Yeah.
What about the Battle of Orwyn Bridge?
That was the turning point.
Llywelyn was killed.
Yes. And it broke the back of Welsh resistance.
His brother Dafydd kept fighting.
For a little while. But he was captured and executed.
So by 1283, Edward had control of Wales.
That's right.
But the story doesn't end there.
No, not even close.
Because Edward had bigger plans for Wales, right?
Much bigger.
He wanted to completely reshape it to solidify his control.
That's where the castle building comes in.
Right. The massive fortresses.
Like Caernarfon and Conquest.
That still stand today.
Exactly.
So what was their purpose?
They were symbols of power.
Okay.
Military stronghold.
To prevent future uprisings.
Exactly.
And they were designed to intimidate the Welsh people.
Think of them like giant stone exclamation points marking Edward's claim to Wales.
It's like he was using architecture as a weapon.
Absolutely. He was projecting his power for generations to come.
And they worked because they're still standing today.
And they became centers of English administration and culture, attracting settlers and merchants.
To further solidify Edward's hold.
Exactly.
So he's using military might construction and population shifts to reshape Wales.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's a fascinating but ruthless display of power.
It shows what kind of ruler Edward was.
Determined and ruthless.
He understood that conquering a land and holding onto it were two very different things.
And that's where things get even more interesting.
Oh,
because this is just the beginning of a much larger story.
With huge consequences for England and Wales.
A story that will continue to unravel in the next part of our deep dive.
It's going to be a good one. You know, Edward's strategy went beyond just military power.
Okay.
He also used propaganda. Propaganda. In medieval times.
Exactly. Think about it. Stories were powerful, especially when most people couldn't read.
Yeah, they relied on oral traditions.
Exactly. And Edward knew how to use that.
How so?
By invoking the legend of King Arthur.
King Arthur, like the Round Table and all that.
Yes.
I mean, Edward was known for his military campaigns, not for chivalry.
That's the clever part.
Okay.
The Arthurian legends weren't just stories. They were part of Britain's cultural identity.
Right.
They talked about a united realm, a glorious past, a powerful king.
And Edward used that to his advantage.
He positioned himself as the heir to that legacy.
So basically, he used those stories to legitimize his claim on Wales.
Exactly. He wanted to make it seem like he was fulfilling an ancient prophecy.
But did people actually buy into that?
It's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but it definitely influenced how people saw him.
Right.
And remember, Edward may have genuinely believed it himself.
Really?
Yeah, he may have actually thought he was the king destined to unite Britain.
That adds a whole new layer to his motivations.
It does, but the book also shows a darker side to Edward's rule,
Okay.
especially in his treatment of Llywelyn's children.
Oh, right.
His daughters were sent to a convent, and his son was sent to a monastery.
And they stay there their whole lives.
Yes.
So that's how he prevented any future claims to the Welsh throne.
It was a ruthless way to ensure there were no figureheads for future rebellions.
I can't imagine what those children went through.
It's a tragic reminder of the cost of these power struggles.
It is.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is that Edward also incorporated Welsh soldiers into his army.
He did.
So he had the very people he conquered fighting for him.
It seems counterintuitive.
It really does.
But that's medieval warfare for you.
I guess so.
Loyalties were complex.
Yeah.
Some Welsh lords saw an opportunity for advancement.
By siding with the winner?
Exactly. Others may have just been trying to survive.
In this new world order.
Exactly.
It's a good reminder that history is never black and white.
It's full of gray areas.
And we have to consider everyone's motivations.
It's important not to oversimplify things.
Right. And speaking of complexity, what about the economic side of things?
Yes.
You know, I always think about knights and battles.
Of course.
But I forget that managing money was important too.
It was crucial.
So how did Edward handle the finances of Wales?
Well, he implemented taxes, of course.
Naturally.
To fund his campaigns and his administration.
I bet the Welsh weren't too happy about that.
They weren't. It was a constant reminder of their subjugation.
And it probably fueled more resentment.
It definitely contributed to future uprisings.
It seems like a vicious cycle.
Edward needed money to maintain control.
But trying to get that money just caused more problems.
Exactly.
So did he ever try to address those concerns?
He did make some attempts at reform.
Okay.
Trying to standardize the legal system and prevent abuse of power.
But his main focus was always on staying in control.
Always.
Even if it meant using unpopular methods.
Exactly. And then there's the story of Morgan ap Maredudd.
Who was he?
He was a powerful lord in Glamorgan.
Okay.
He actually sided with Edward at first.
Against Llywelyn.
Yeah, he saw an opportunity to gain more power.
By aligning with Edward.
Exactly.
So he was a pragmatist.
But he was also ambitious.
Okay.
And he quickly became disillusioned with Edward.
How come?
He felt like Edward wasn't giving him enough respect.
So he rebelled.
Yes, in 1294.
Wow.
He captured castles and even allied with Maedog ap Llywelyn.
So Edward's control wasn't as strong as he thought.
No, it wasn't.
What happened to Morgan?
Well, Edward eventually put down the rebellion.
Yeah.
But he didn't punish Morgan as harshly as you might expect.
Really?
He actually pardoned him and even gave him back some of his land.
That's surprising.
It seems Edward understood that having Morgan as an ally was better than making him an enemy.
It's all about strategy.
Exactly.
Even the most powerful rulers had to be diplomatic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Morgan's story shows us that Wales was a diverse place.
Okay.
Not everyone resisted Edward. Some collaborated with him.
And somewhere in between.
Exactly.
It's always more complicated than it seems.
Always. The book also talks about Edward's impact on the legal system.
Right, the Statute of Wales.
Yes, a lot of people see it as the moment when English law was imposed on Wales.
But the book says it was more complicated than that.
It was. It wasn't a complete replacement of Welsh law.
Oh.
The statute actually incorporated elements of existing Welsh legal practices.
Really? Like what?
Things like inheritance and land ownership.
So it was more of a blend.
There's a hybrid system.
Interesting. So was Edward trying to respect Welsh customs or just trying to make his rule easier?
It's hard to know for sure,
Yeah.
but it shows that Welsh legal traditions didn't disappear overnight.
And they probably influenced English law, too.
Absolutely, it was a two-way street.
So this statute wasn't the end of the story.
It was just the beginning of a new chapter in Welsh legal history.
It's fascinating how history is never really over.
It's a continuous process.
Right. It's all about these ongoing relationships between power and culture.
And identity.
And in the case of Edward and Wales, those relationships were constantly changing.
They were.
We talked about Caernarfon and Conwy,
Yes.
but those were just two of many castles Edward built.
His castle building program was massive.
And it changed the landscape of Wales.
It did, literally.
Those castles weren't just military bases.
No, they were designed to show everyone who was in charge.
And they were built to last.
Hundreds of years.
And they did last.
Many of them are still standing.
It's amazing to think about.
It is. Those castles are a direct link to that time.
But they also brought about economic and social change.
Yes, they attracted English settlers and merchants.
Changing the demographics of Wales.
Exactly.
It must have been a strange time for the Welsh people.
It was. Their land was being transformed, their culture was challenged, everything was changing.
I wonder what they thought about it all.
That's a question historians are still trying to answer.
Right, trying to understand the experiences of those who lived through it.
Exactly. Because studying history isn't just about the past.
It's also about connecting with the people who lived through it.
Their stories, their struggles, their impact on our world.
And in the case of Edward and Wales, it's a story full of ambition, resilience, and the clash of two cultures.
Two very different visions for a nation. It's fascinating to think about the economic side of things in medieval Wales.
It is. You know, it's easy to focus on the battles and the politics.
Right.
But what was daily life like for the average person?
Well, for most people, their lives revolved around agriculture.
Farming and all that.
Exactly. But there was also trade within Wales and with places like England and Ireland.
So it was a diverse economy.
It was, and wool production was really important.
Welsh wool.
Oh yeah, it was famous for its high quality.
So how did Edward's conquest change things economically?
Well, his policies aimed to integrate Wales into the English economy.
Trying to create more opportunities for trade?
Exactly. He standardized weights and measures, encouraged English merchants to settle in Wales, and even invested in things like roads and bridges.
So he was modernizing in a way.
You could say that, but there was also a darker side.
Okay.
Edward imposed heavy taxes on the Welsh.
Oh, yeah.
He extracted resources like timber and minerals and often favored English merchants over Welsh ones.
That wasn't all good.
No, it wasn't. It was a mix of progress and exploitation.
And that probably fueled resentment toward English rule.
It definitely played a role in the many rebellions that happened during Edward's reign.
Because people didn't like seeing their wealth going to England.
Exactly. It highlights how economics and power are intertwined.
It's not just about armies and castles.
No, it's about who controls the resource.
Who benefits from them.
Right. And that brings us to the story of Ranald Grey.
Who was he?
He was appointed Justiciar of Chester in 1281.
Which gave him a lot of power in Wales.
He had authority over a large area.
And the book says he was a controversial figure.
He was known for being corrupt and abusing his power.
How so?
He ignored Welsh laws and customs, imposed unfair fines and taxes, and basically enriched himself at the expense of the Welsh people.
So he was a classic corrupt official.
Pretty much. He took advantage of his position for personal gain.
Did Edward know about this?
It's hard to say. There were complaints against him.
Yeah.
But Grey had powerful friends at the English court.
So maybe Edward turned a blind eye to it all.
As long as the money kept flowing.
It just goes to show that power corrupts.
It does. And it highlights the challenges of governing a conquered territory.
Trying to maintain control without alienating the population.
Exactly. But Grey's story also shows that individuals can have a big impact on history.
Okay.
He wasn't just following orders, he was making his own choices.
And those choices had consequences.
For everyone involved.
It adds another layer of complexity to the story.
It reminds us that history is not just about kings and queens.
It's about the actions of ordinary people.
And how those actions shape the world.
And Edward's conquest of Wales had a lasting impact.
It changed both England and Wales forever.
Politically, culturally, economically.
It's a legacy that we're still grappling with today.
Trying to understand our own identities and histories.
The book really makes you think about those issues.
It encourages us to learn from the past.
To acknowledge the injustices.
And to recognize the resilience of the Welsh people.
And that's what makes history so fascinating. It's not about glorifying the past.
It's about understanding it.
Learning from it.
Recognizing our shared humanity.
And in the case of Edward the Curse and Wales,
it's a story that continues to resonate with us today.
A story of power, identity, and the clash of cultures.
Well, that brings our deep dive into Edward I and Wales to a close. What did you find most interesting about this story? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through medieval history, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the past.